public has. Now, in the Bhubharti Act, as I mentioned, there are also a lot of legal issues which were there in the Dharani Act which have been trying to be rectified. And I'll just give you a little brief of it. So, the three major sections which are there in Dharani, this Bhubharti Act are section 5, 7 and 8. Now, section 5 basically deals with all the sale related or gift related aspects of land transfer. That is, you sell the land or you gift the land or you partition or you mortgage or you exchange. When that is happening, there is already an entry in the land record in favor of the landowner. So the landowner goes to the sub-registrar, which is the Tehsildar as of under this act, and there is also a possibility that Deputy Tehsildar can also be given that power, because sometimes Tehsildar is not there in the office. And when the landowner, that is the seller, and the buyer, they go, the transaction happens through the Aadhaar authentication of both the seller and the buyer, and the instantaneous transfer of that land takes place from one account to the other, and instantaneous mutation and passbook generation happens. So that happens under section 5. The second section which is there is section 7, which deals with the succession related issues. In fact, one of the major shortcomings of the Dharani Act was that there is no provision for any verification of whether all the legal hires have come or not. So in fact, I have personally come across a few cases where, let's say, the landowner dies and he or she had 5 legal hires. Now only 3 will come with an inter se family settlement deed. Ignoring the 2 others, they don't even tell that they are going to get this mutated. Just 3 will come to the sub-registrar, that is the Tehsildar, and get that mutated in favor of the 3. Now later on, when the 2 other people come to know, they really have no recourse to that, and that is the beginning of a dispute in that land transfer. And more often than not, those 3 people will actually sell that land or transfer in the name of a third party also within a matter of a day or 2. And the buyer would not even know that there were 2 other people who were left out. So that was one of the major lacunas, because the act didn't provide any sort of a verification. Now under this new act, there is going to be a verification mechanism which will ensure that all the legal hires are actually covered. And then only that succession happens. And the succession also, we have also given provision for other things also, which are again absent in the previous act, which is will, or whether registered will or unregistered will, and also other mechanisms through which that can happen. So that's one of the major improvements. Then the third section relating to this is section 8. Now this is a huge improvement compared to the Dharani Act, because the Dharani Act only provided for only through a court decree a mutation could happen. But there are multiple other ways in which mutation can happen, which could be, let's say, an ORC which is issued, or a 3080 certificate which is issued, or a 13B, 3080 under the Tenancy Act, or 13B under that regularization of Sada Bainama, or a sale certificate which is issued by some authority. Let's say an NCLT has sold the land, or some other entity has sold the land, or even when government has actually also alienated the land in favor of, let's say, a company or an entity or an individual. There was no, it's really surprising, but there was no real provision under the Dharani Act to do that kind of mutation. It was all left to an executive circular to do that. And many times that used to be challenged in the court, and the court used to question that, since you don't have a legal authority, how are you doing it? Now this act brings all those possible mechanisms for such transfer under the ambit of section 8, and that will be done at the level of RDO. In fact, in the previous avatar, that is Dharani, all those changes were actually coming up to the level of collector, because of the system and the circular on the basis of which this was done. So now it is going to be done at the RDO level, that is the revenue divisional level, revenue divisional officer level. So for 5 and 7, Tehsildar is the competent authority. 5 can also be delegated to Deputy Tehsildar, and 8 is going to be the RDO. So this is the major overall architecture of this act. Another improvement which has been done is this whole gamut of how the initial ROR is prepared and how the ROR is corrected. That is, the record of rights is prepared and corrected. Now, in the Dharni Act, there was a provision for preparation of ROR. That's how the land records came up through the LRUP program. But there was no provision under the Act for how do you correct the entry. Many of you would have heard these modules, TM33, TM31, so many other modules which were there. All those modules did not really have a legal authority. They were all based on an executive circular from the Chief Commissioner Land Administration, because CCL has the power of the Board of the Revenue. So based on only the circular, all those changes were happening, but there was no legislative backing to it. And that's why when sometimes it was questioned in the court, it actually was very difficult for the person to prove that yes, this change has happened through a legally backed mechanism. And that resulted in a lot of increase of litigation in this area. Now, under the Bhubharti Act, section 4.5 and 4.6 will provide for that legal backing. 4.5 is for correction of an existing entry, and 4.6 is for a missing entry. And these two sections now give that provision under which a competent authority can be defined by the government, and that competent authority will have power to either add an entry or to correct an entry. And that ensures that legal safeguard comes in. Another important issue which in fact the industry knows, and industry used to always complain about, was the absence of an appeal or a revision mechanism under the Dharni Act. There was no appeal or no revision mechanism. If you have a problem with whatever has happened, the only recourse is to go to a civil court. Now, the Bhubharti Act provides for a very, very strong two-tier appeal mechanism. First appeal and a second appeal. First appeal will be to the next competent authority. Like if the order is by a Tehsildar, the first appeal is to RDO and second appeal is to collector. There are certain sections where RDO is the original authority, then the first appeal will be to collector and second appeal will be to land tribunal. So that ensures that in a summary way, those problems can be dealt with rather than a very, very lengthy and formal process of a civil court, because many of these issues actually can be addressed through revenue department based appeal mechanism. And this is what this act also tries to bring in. There's also a revision mechanism if there is some land wherein government interest is involved and that is actually transferred illegally or unauthorizedly, then the CCLA will have power for revision to correct that. Now there are a lot of futuristic provisions also which are there in the act. As I mentioned, this act has been prepared by looking at all the other state acts, our previous 3 acts, the implementation of Dharni, and also in which direction the land record management system is actually heading. So there is something called Bhudar, which is now being talked about in the country, which is like every person is having an Aadhaar number. Every land parcel will also have a Bhudar number. So that if you just enter that, like the Aadhaar number, we use it. Similarly, if you enter that unique number, you actually get all the details, the location, survey number, village, mandal, district, state, that information can be done. So you can just kind of communicate with that single Bhudar ID. Now, again, this act provides for a legal background, backing for that. And there's a provision for a temporary Budar, which is a unique ID which will be given. And there's also a provision for permanent Budar, which is going to be based on the geo coordinates of the land. And that will ensure that there is a unique land correlation, which parcel it is and which ID it is. Another very important factor is that while doing registration, the Act provides for a survey or a subdivision map to be attached to the registration document. Now, this is something which is being done in our neighboring state of Karnataka for quite some time. In fact, if I remember correctly, Karnataka is doing it from almost like 2008-9 under their Bhumi project. So what has happened is, in last 15-16 years, because a subdivision or a survey map is attached to the registration document, their land records have been, the spatial land records have also been improved, so much so that today nearly 90 to 95% of their land record is now having a proper authenticated latest map. Whereas we have a lot of issue because in our state somehow historically subdivisions has not happened. Our subdivisions have happened only in the register but not in the map. And this will ensure that there is a continuation of that subdivision process as and when the land is transacted. Again, the last point which I have mentioned there is again something which is very, very futuristic, and in fact we are one of the first states in the country to talk about this, is the record of rights in non-agricultural land and also Gram Kantam and Abadi land. And the Act provides a provision for it. Of course, it will come into the force from which government feels that the system is ready to implement it, but there is a legal now provision in the Act itself to do that. And this will ensure that even non-agricultural lands also, there is some element of ROR which happens. Now, the reason why it is very important is that historically, non-agricultural lands were not under the purview of the ROR. And the reason for that is, if you look at the history of land records, we started from a time when the land record system was more about collection of land revenue from the land. Because at that time the income tax or present GST or sales tax was not a very important component of government income. Most of the income used to come from land. So the state, that is the government, was very much interested only in from whom do you collect the land revenue. So if you see, most of the records are basically a record of assessment of land revenue. It has not traditionally been a record of rights or the title. And that's why we've kind of missed the maintenance of non-agricultural land record historically, not just in our state, but in most other states of the country also. And this is something now which is provided under the Act.